Hi, Coach Lydia here to explain how to count macros on our program. All foods consist of macronutrients, or macros for short. The three macronutrients are proteins, carbs, and fat. Most macro counting programs require you to count every bite of protein, carbs, and fat. But with our direct macro system, you only need to count the macro that is found in the highest amount in a food. You get the benefits of counting macros without all the work. For example, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter has 16 grams of fat, 7 grams of carbs, and 7 grams of protein. As you can see, there's more fat in peanut butter than carbs or protein, so we only count the fat. That means fat is the direct macro in peanut butter, and we will count the 16 grams toward your total fat intake. The protein and carbs in peanut butter still exist, but they are considered indirect sources, so we don't count them toward our macro totals. Here's another example. 1 ounce of cooked steak has 8 grams of protein, 0 grams of carbs, and 3 grams of fat. Since there's more protein than there are carbs or fat, we only count the protein. That means protein is the direct macro source in steak, and we will count the 8 grams toward our protein intake. The fat is considered an indirect source, so we don't count it toward our macro totals. Majority rules. Okay, one more just to make sure you've got it. 1 cup of quinoa has 42 grams of carbs, 10 grams of protein, and 0 grams of fat. Since there are more carbs than there is protein and fat, we only count the carbs. That means carbs are the direct macro in quinoa, and we will count the 42 grams toward our carb intake. The protein and fats are considered indirect, so we don't count them toward our macro totals. Now that you understand our direct macro counting system, let's look at the food list. On the food list, you'll see foods separated by macro category: proteins, carbs, and fat. Foods are listed based on the direct macro in them. The good news is you don't have to calculate anything because we've done the math for you. Simply find the food you want to eat and count the macro amount listed next to it. For example, the direct macro in steak is protein, so you'll find steak in the food list under protein. The direct macro in peanut butter is fat, so you'll find peanut butter in the food list in the fat category. And because the direct macro in quinoa is carbs, you'll find quinoa in the food list as a carb. In the food list, you'll also see a few food categories that include combinations of 2 macros, like protein and carbs, carbs and fat, and protein and fat. With these foods, you'll count both macros that are listed next to the food. For example, cheese is listed in the protein and fat category, so if you eat cheese, you'll count the protein and the fat macros in cheese. Lentils are listed in the protein and carb category, so you'll count the protein and carbs in lentils. Chia seeds are listed in the carb and fat category, so you'll count the carbs and fat in chia seeds. These foods are clearly labeled in the food list, so you never have to guess or calculate anything. There's also a category for free foods, which don't have a significant enough amount of any macro to count. So if something is labeled as free, you don't have to count any macros. If you decide to eat something that is not on the food list, count all the fat, protein, and carb macros in that food based on what the food label says. But we recommend sticking to the foods on the list to keep things simple and get great results. One last thing on counting macros. Traditional macro counting apps count all macros. But our direct macro counting system does the work for you, so don't use these apps. Simply use the food list to track your macros. If you stick to the foods on the list and meet the macros your coach gives you, you will see amazing results. A positive mindset helps too. Don't look at the food list and focus on the things you can't have. Instead, focus on all the great foods you can enjoy. You'll be happier and get better results.